Today I'm going to read another story by Margaret Mahy from her anthology called Leaf Magic and 5 Other Favourites. I'm going to be reading the third story in her anthology, which is called Ultraviolet Catastrophe. Sally's mother stood underneath a big tree, looking up into its branches. "Sally!" she called. "Are you there, Sally?" "She isn't here," Sally called back. "Something has eaten her. It's dangerous up here." "Sally, come down at once," her mother called again. Sally shut her eyes and answered, "I'm not Sally. I'm Horrible Stumper, the tree pirate." But it was no use. Horrible Stumper, the tree pirate, had to come down out of the leaves and the smell of spring and turn into Sally once more. Sally was washed around the face and scrubbed around the knees. She had to take off her blue jeans and to put on her best dress and her long white socks. Her hair was brushed until it shone and her ears went all red and hot. She was being taken to visit a cousin of her mother's called Aunt Anne Pringle. Aunt Anne lived in the country, but not on a farm. Her house was called Sunny Nook, and it was full of things Sally was not allowed to touch. "She doesn't like me even to breathe," Sally said crossly. "She fusses and fusses all the time, and there's no one to play with." "You'll have to manage somehow," replied her mother. "Surely you can sit still for a couple of hours. I know Anne is fussy, and I know there are no children to play with, but you can't expect everything to suit you all the time. Sometimes you have to suit other people. Oh dear, your knees still look dirty." "It's the scratches," Sally explained. "Knees are the worst part for getting scratched. I could paint faces on my knees and then the scratches wouldn't show." "Come on," said Sally's mother in a rather sharp voice. "Hurry up or we'll be late." They caught the bus in time. Sally had hoped they would miss it. Aunt Anne met them at the door of Sunny Nook. Sally could tell at once that she had not improved. She was tiny and terribly clean and neat. She looked more like a freshly dusted china ornament than any real person. She smiled at Sally and then talked over her head to her mother. "I have father staying with me for a month," she said. "It's rather awkward. Old man can be so difficult, and he's very set in his ways, you know. The things he says, sometimes I don't understand just what he's getting at. He uses such funny long words." Sally's mother made an "I'm sorry to hear that" clicking sound with her tongue. They went into Aunt Anne's tiny sitting room. There on the flowery couch was a very clean, scrubbed and scoured, washed up and brushed down little old man. Sally thought Aunt Anne must have rinsed him out and then starched and ironed him and then polished him with a soft cloth. "This is Sally, father," said Aunt Anne. "Do you remember hearing about Sally? I told you we had a dear little girl coming to visit us." Sally's mother thought she saw a horrible stumper look coming onto Sally's face again. She began to talk quickly. "Sally, this is Great Uncle Magnus Pringle." Great Uncle Magnus looked at Sally from under his wrinkly eyelids. He said something very mysterious. "Ultraviolet catastrophe to you, young lady." His voice was loud for such a clean old man, loud but not crackly. It was rather like guns at sea. "Oh, don't start talking that rubbish," said Aunt Anne fretfully. "Look, why don't you two take each other for a walk down to the corner while we girls have a little chat by ourselves?" Mother and Aunt Anne took Sally and Great Uncle Magnus out of the house and pointed them down the road towards the corner. "Be good and keep clean," said Aunt Anne. "Do look after each other," called Sally's mother. Sally and Great Uncle Magnus walked along the country road in the country sunshine, smelling the country smells of wet grass and cows. They came to a thick, dark hedge speckled with little white flowers. Suddenly, Great Uncle Magnus stopped. "Do you like to go through hedges?" he asked. "I do, and it's years I've been through a good hedge." Sally stared at Great Uncle Magnus, amazed at such thoughts in a great uncle. "I see a hole in this hedge," went on Great Uncle Magnus, "and I'm going through it. It would be a help to have you give me a hand up on the other side." "Shall I go first then?" asked Sally, "in case of danger?" "That would be kind of you," said Great Uncle Magnus. "I have this creaky knee, you see. It's a good knee, mind you. I've had it for years, but it is creaky." Sally scrambled through the hole in the hedge, smelling its special hedge smell as she went. The hedge tried to hold on to her as hedges do, but she got through safely. After her came Great Uncle Magnus, breathing hard. "Ah," he said, as Sally helped him up. "That was good. That was refreshing. Now what have we here?" On the other side of the hedge, the ground was swampy from yesterday's rain. In between the grass, muddy water was oozing. Grass tufts stuck out of puddles. "It's a long time since I had a paddle," said Great Uncle Magnus thoughtfully. "What are you doing?" cried Sally. "Taking my shoes and socks off," the great uncle replied, and so he was. Sally grinned. She sat down beside Great Uncle Magnus and took off her shoes and her long white socks too. She had to help the great uncle with a tightly tied shoelace. "She always ties my shoelaces as if she were choking my shoes to death," said Great Uncle Magnus. Great Uncle Magnus's pale feet sank greedily into the mud. "Ah," he sighed, "there's something about mud, eh? Nothing else has quite that muddy feel, has it?" Sally was amazed again. She had not expected to find a great uncle who felt the same way about mud as she did. "Ultraviolet catastrophe," murmured the great uncle to himself. "What does that mean?" asked Sally boldly. "It's the sound I say it for, not the meaning," Great Uncle Magnus explained. "Some people say, 'Goodness gracious.' That doesn't mean much. They say it for the sound. But I like to say something that sounds even better and more important." "Words usually mean some real thing," said Sally carefully. "For instance, I say, 'Horrible stumper,' and it means a tree pirate. Don't your good words mean anything?" "They do mean something scientific," admitted Great Uncle Magnus. "Something scientific and too hard to explain." He started to paddle along through the grass and mud. He had a muddy patch on the back of his trousers where he had been sitting down. "You see," he said as he went along, "Annie's a good girl and she means well, but she treats me like one of her pot plants. She waters me and puts me in the sun and leaves me alone. Serve her right if I grew up the wall and put out flowers. After a while I begin to think I'm really turning into a pot plant, and then I sing to myself or use long words. 'Ultraviolet catastrophe,' I say, or sometimes 'seismological singularity.'" "That's a hard one," said Sally with great respect. "Too hard for a pot plant," Great Uncle Magnus nodded. "No mere pot plant would use words like that. Then I know that I'm Magnus Pringle all the time." They came down to a clear stream flowing over brown stones. On the bank above the stream, a green tree spread wide, rough arms. Great Uncle Magnus's sharp old eyes looked up into the green arch above them. "It's years since I climbed a tree. Years and years," said Great Uncle Magnus. I'd climb this one if it wasn't for my fear of the tree pirates." "Oh, well, I'll just go up and check for you," Sally offered eagerly. "This is too good a tree to waste, and when I'm up, I can help you if your knee creaks or if it's too hard for you or anything." "There's nothing like a tree," Great Uncle Magnus remarked a few minutes later. "It's good being up in a tree, up in the air and the leaves all around us. What do you think?" "Ultraviolet catastrophe, I think," answered Sally boldly. "Just what I was thinking myself, seismological singularity," said Great Uncle Magnus. "I think I'll sing a bit." He pointed his old nose to the sky and began to sing, "Boiled beef and carrots, boiled beef and carrots." Sally felt very happy sitting up there in the tree listening to Great Uncle Magnus. Everything felt very alive, the tree with its branches and bark and its spring leaves bright against the blue sky. Sally pointed her nose at the sky too and felt the sunshine through the leaves in hot spring freckles on her face. The tree at home and the tree here were like sunny rooms in open, rustling houses. She looked down at the stream below. "Is it years and years since you made a dam across a creek?" asked Sally. "How did you guess?" Great Uncle Magnus said wonderingly. "It is certainly a long time ago. I see some good stones down there too." Somehow Sally and Great Uncle Magnus were not as tidy as they had been when they set out. Making a dam did not improve things. When you are making a dam, it is easy to get damp and muddy around the edges. They built a good dam out of mossy green and brown stones. The cunning water found a way over or around or through, keeping them busy and silent for quite a long time. Then a sudden noise made Great Uncle Magnus look up. He cleared his throat carefully. "Sally," he said, "don't be frightened, but just look behind you and tell me what you see." Sally looked under her arm at the bank behind her. A large brown and white cow was standing there watching them. She had a very young brown and white calf beside her. She had very sharp horns. As Sally looked, she put her head down and pointed her horns at them. She gave a grumbling, angry moo. "Having a new calf can make a cow very cross," Great Uncle Magnus said, gathering up his socks and shoes. "Not that I'm frightened of a mere cow, but still." "A cow with a calf isn't as mere as other cows, I don't think," said Sally, gathering up her socks and shoes too. The cow started to come down the bank at them. Sally and Great Uncle Magnus moved quickly. Sally was amazed at the speed a great uncle can put on when there is an angry cow coming down a bank after him. There was no hedge on the other side of the creek, but there was a barbed wire fence. Socks and shoes were tossed across. Then Sally scrambled over it. As she did so, she heard the hem of her dress tear open. A moment later, Great Uncle Magnus's trousers tore too. Sally and Great Uncle Magnus stood staring at each other while the cow mooed angrily at them from the other side of the fence. Then her calf called and she hurried back to it. And at that very moment, like other anxious mooing cows, Sally's mother and Aunt Anne came calling down the road. Great Uncle Magnus shook his head slowly. "I can't see myself," he said, "but I don't think your mother is going to be pleased with your appearance." "I don't think Aunt Anne will be pleased with yours either," Sally told him. They were both wet and muddy and stained and torn. There was a most terrible fuss. "How could could you, Father? How could you? Aunt Anne cried. It just happened, Annie, said Great Uncle Magnus in a humble voice. Aunt Anne made them stand on newspapers on the path while she brushed them and cleaned them as well as she could. It's just as well you're going home at the end of the week, she said to Great Uncle Magnus. I couldn't stand another adventure like this. Very sorry, Annie, said Great Uncle Magnus in his humble voice. He looked at Sally's mother. Why don't you and Sally come to see me when I go home? He asked. I've got a little place by the beach and a little boat I paddle around in. I catch a few fish from the end of the wharf. You wouldn't be bored. We'd love to come, said Sally's mother. She wasn't as upset as Aunt Anne, being used to mud and torn skirts. I can see you two get on well together, she added. We've got a lot in common, Great Uncle Magnus agreed. They had been so long on their walk there was scarcely time for Sally to have a bite to eat before getting ready to go home. Sally and Great Uncle Magnus looked at each other and could not find proper words to say goodbye in, even if it was only for a short time. Hurry, Sally, we'll miss the bus, called her mother. Sally suddenly knew the exact words to say. Ultraviolet catastrophe, she called back as her mother waved to Aunt Anne with one hand and tugged her with the other. Great Uncle Magnus brightened up. Horrible stumper to you, young lady, he replied. I wouldn't wish to go on a country walk with a better tree pirate than you yourself. The